Day 2 of the US blockade on Iran brings fresh humiliation for President Trump as operational failure becomes increasingly obvious worldwide. Ships depart Iranian ports without any hurdles, while Tehran openly taunts the US military's inability to enforce the naval restriction. Trump hints at pursuing fresh diplomatic talks as the critical Hormuz Strait siege collapses completely beyond American control. Despite warnings from the US military about the blockade, multiple commercial ships have reportedly crossed the Strait of Hormuz, according to Iranian state-linked reports. Maritime data has shown that at least 2 vessels successfully passed through the strait even while the US naval blockade was officially in effect, as reported by Press TV. The bulk carrier Christiana, having just unloaded its cargo at the Iranian port of Bandar Imam Khomeini, then exited the Persian Gulf by crossing the Strait of Hormuz shortly after the blockade went into force. Another tanker, Elpis, departed from the Iranian port of Bushehr carrying a methanol shipment and also managed to clear the strait despite the surrounding military restrictions. A third vessel, the Chinese-linked tanker Rich Starry, reportedly passed through the waterway overnight, using an Iranian-preferred route and signaling that some traffic is still finding ways to transit. Analysts have warned that vessel tracking signals and AIS data in the region appear to be increasingly disrupted or deliberately manipulated, making it harder to verify every movement. Meanwhile, the US military says that destroyer-class vessels are actively monitoring and, where necessary, targeting ships operating around Iranian ports and nearby lanes. A US destroyer reportedly intercepted 2 oil tankers that had just departed from the Iranian port of Chabahar, ordering them to turn back, according to a Reuters report. According to US officials, several merchant vessels have already been warned over radio or otherwise redirected away from areas covered by the blockade enforcement zone. Since the blockade took effect on April 13th, more than 20 commercial vessels have still been recorded transiting the Strait of Hormuz, according to a Wall Street Journal report on shipping data. The continued passage of ships suggests either partial enforcement of the blockade or that the measure has not fully shut down all maritime traffic in the critical waterway. Despite the United States announcing a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, Iran appears to be largely unaffected in its immediate response. Iran has also dismissed the impact of the blockade, suggesting it can offset pressure by expanding cross-border trade activity. Officials highlighted the country's extensive 8,000-kilometer land and maritime borders, indicating that alternative routes remain available. According to reports, Iran's interior minister has instructed border provinces to increase both imports and exports. Iran's interior minister said, and I quote, "The governors of border regions, for the purposes of neutralizing enemy threat to the level of population's life, should further strengthen and develop border trade, including imports of primary goods and exports of products, mobilizing all the possible national and regional resources for this purpose and interacting with public entities, such as cooperatives of border residents, and so on." End quote. Despite enforcing a naval blockade, the United States is reportedly exploring the possibility of resuming talks with Iran. According to reports, Donald Trump indicated that a new round of discussions could take place within the next 2 days. He also suggested that Pakistan may once again serve as the venue for these negotiations. Meanwhile, on April 13th, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance accused Iran of engaging in economic pressure tactics. Vance also called for the complete reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, describing any restrictions as unacceptable. Iran strongly condemned the United States as it launched a provocative naval blockade on the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz, escalating tensions in one of the world's most critical shipping lanes. Iran's IRGC Quds Force chief boldly declared that both the US and Israel will ultimately return completely empty-handed from their aggressive maneuvers in the region. Brigadier General Esmail Qani's pointed comments were prominently reported by the Iranian state-affiliated outlet Press TV on April 13th, highlighting Tehran's unyielding stance. The U.S. on April 13th officially launched a comprehensive naval blockade aimed specifically at stopping ships from entering or exiting key Iranian ports along the Persian Gulf. However, fresh reports indicated that multiple commercial and cargo ships successfully transited the Strait of Hormuz despite the heavily publicized U.S. blockade efforts. An Iran-linked oil tanker along with several Chinese ships were reportedly able to transit freely amid the ongoing blockade, underscoring potential cracks in the American enforcement. The Quds Force commander said, Quote, "The Unified Resistance Front has a powerful and effective presence throughout the region, and is lying in wait for the enemies of humanity. They will pull out of the region without any achievement." Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, Esmail Baghaei, has also stepped forward to sharply criticize this controversial move directly on the social media platform known as X. The Iranian foreign ministry spokesman said, quote, "Can an illegal war of choice be won through a revenge of choice against the global economy? Is it ever worthwhile to cut off one's nose to spite one's face?" Unquote. Iran's military has issued a stern warning that any perceived threat directed towards its vital ports would inevitably trigger a much broader and more intense regional response across the area. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, has explicitly stated that no port located in the Persian Gulf or the Sea of Oman would remain secure or operational if its own ports were targeted or hit in any way. Iran's armed forces spokesperson said, quote, "Enemy-affiliated vessels do not and will not have the right to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Other vessels will be allowed to transit the strait in compliance with the regulations of the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran." Unquote. A Chinese tanker sanctioned by the United States sailed through the Strait of Hormuz on April 14th, marking a striking development amid the new maritime standoff in the Gulf. The vessel passed through Hormuz despite the US-imposed blockade, according to ship tracking data that showed it successfully made the transit out of the Gulf. Reuters made the claim about the vessel Rich Starry, citing tracking data from LSEG, Marine Traffic, and PLR to document the ship's movement through the strategic waterway. According to the same data, the Rich Starry would be the first ship to make it through the strait and exit the Gulf since the blockade began. Notably, both the tanker and its owner, Shanghai Xianrun Shipping Company, Limited, are under US sanctions, making the passage especially politically sensitive. Reuters reported that sanctions on the Chinese-linked company were imposed because of its dealings with Iran, placing the vessel in the wider network of trade restrictions tied to Tehran. The Rich Starry is a medium-range tanker carrying about 250,000 barrels of methanol, according to the shipping data cited in the reports. The vessel loaded that cargo at its last port of call in Hamria in the United Arab Emirates, adding another regional link to the ship's voyage. Reuters also reported that the Chinese-owned tanker has a Chinese crew on board, based on the available vessel data. An Iranian embassy statement described the Rich Starry as a Malawi-flagged tanker, adding another detail to the growing attention around the ship's transit. Iranian embassy in Ghana wrote on X, and I quote, "Breaking, Rich Starry, a Chinese oil tanker sanctioned for shipping Iranian oil, flying the flag of Malawi, a country with no coastline, just sailed through America's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz." The Navy, with its many big beautiful ships, issued repeated warnings. Reportedly, the tanker's captain upgraded to premium to skip the ads. Edit. We're being told the blockade only applies to countries the US isn't afraid of. That list used to be long. It now fits on Trump's McDonald's receipt, delivered by DoorDash. Unquote. After imposing a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, Donald Trump has signaled a possible shift toward renewed diplomatic engagement. The US president indicated that he is considering a second round of negotiations with Iran, according to recent reports. In an interview with the New York Post, Trump stated that discussions with Iran could resume within the next 2 days. He also suggested that the proposed talks may once again take place in Islamabad, based on current indications. However, Trump's remarks appear to differ from earlier statements made in the same interview cycle. Previous reports had indicated that he described the pace of talks with Iran as slow and uncertain. He had also earlier suggested that a second round of negotiations might not be held in Pakistan. According to the New York Post, Trump had even indicated that European countries could host the next phase of discussions.